Good Shabbos, everyone. Good Shabbos. Good Shabbos. Today is April 4th, and it is also the 6th of the lunar month of Nisan, which means that the moon is just about at 50% right now as it is waning towards the full moon of Pesach. In the sky tonight are Mars, Jupiter, and Venus. Actually, I should correct myself. They are up there, Mars, Jupiter, and Venus, but they all set at times that probably we will not see them in the sky. But if the skies are clear tonight, we can definitely look for Orion and Scorpio and Gemini. The Willamette River today is flowing at 38,900 cubic feet per second, which is still on the high side for this day in history. The 75th percentile is 35,100 cubic feet per second. So we're still on the high side of the historical flow rates for the river today. The parasha of the week is Vayikra. Vayikra is the first parasha of the book of Vayikra, which in English people call the book of Leviticus. And the verse that I'm looking at this week is relevant to Pesach. So the verse is here in chapter 2, verse 11. Kol hamincha asher takrivu la'Adonai lo te'aseh chametz ki chol se'or v'chol davash lo taktiru mimenu isheh la'Adonai. No meal offering that you offer to Hashem should be made with chametz, with leavened products. For no se'or, another word for a leavening agent, or honey may be turned into smoke as an offering by fire to Hashem. So the two products mentioned there are the same product that you do not use in offerings to Hashem, are also the same products that we remove from our possession and do not consume during Pesach. So those are chametz. Chametz is a leavened product, okay? Anything that has been leavened in the process of production. And se'or is probably sourdough starter. In the ancient world, the only kind of leavening agent that people knew was sourdough starter. So when you are cleaning your home, you want to make sure if you have sourdough starter, got to get it out of your house, get it out of your possession, and definitely do not consume it for the week of Pesach. And with regard to chametz, those are all the products like bread and crackers and tortillas and so forth. Those all get removed from our possession as well. The Torah itself doesn't actually give us, well, it does give us an explanation for why we eat matzah and do not eat chametz during Pesach. And the rationale it gives is that we do this in order to commemorate Yetziat Mitzrayim, the going out of Egypt, and the type of bread that was eaten by the Israelites when they fled Egypt. The type of bread that they're talking about, according to archaeologists, would have been sourdough bread. Items that had actually been, the sourdough starter had been added to flour and water. That stuff had become leavened and then it would be baked into products. The stuff that they made was just probably sourdough starter mixed in with flour and water, or maybe just the flour and the water, and they made the bread there. But when it says they did not have their time to allow their bread to rise, we're talking about the type of bread that is made from sourdough starter. Today, with the kinds of yeasts that we often or more often use in baking, um, all leavened products are forbidden, not just things that are made with the seor. The references to chametz in the Torah itself lead to these questions in the rabbinic tradition to ask what is actually the spiritual component of chametz that makes this such a big deal on Pesach to remove it completely from our possessions, and definitely not to consume it. It seems well beyond just commemorating what our ancestors ate when they went out of Egypt in the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. So for thousands of years, there's been some kind of spiritual component to the chametz that is also part of what we're doing on Pesach. There's a book called Kad HaKemach by Bachya ben Asher, who was one of the famous rabbis of Andalusia, of the famous Spanish rabbis. And he writes this book called Kada Kemach, which has this beautiful description of how mitzvot encompass speech, feelings, thought, and action, and how that is related to um, to the act of removing chametz from ourselves and our lives, and the consumption of matzah. He says the mitzvot, by the way, mitzvot and matzot are spelled exactly the same. So commandments and matzot are spelled exactly the same, which is interesting. He says the mitzvot have three categories: the mitzvot of speech, of your heart, and of action. As it is written in Deuteronomy 30:14, the Torah is in your mouth and in your heart to do it. So in that verse from Deuteronomy, we have the Torah is in your mouth, that's speech, in your heart, in your emotional and thought center, and to do it. So the Torah is in your mouth and your heart to do it, and do it represents action. So speech, heart, and action. The Torah comes to annul chametz and seor in the heart, corresponding to the mitzvot which are dependent upon the heart. Comes the Kabbalah to instruct us to eradicate it from the house, or to burn it, eradicate the chametz and seor from our house, or to burn it, corresponding to the mitzvah of action. And to say kol chamira, corresponding to the mitzvot of speech. So Kol chamira is an Aramaic phrase that is used after you've already searched your house, you've removed the chametz, you've sold anything that you can't get rid of, um, and and you've done bedikat chametz, where you walk around the house at night with a candle, a single candle, looking for any chametz that you might have missed. When you after you've done that, you recite this formula that night and also the next morning, nullifying anything you may have missed in your heart, and you use your mouth to do that. So he continues, just as bedikat chametz, searching for the chametz, is not valid by sunlight, nor by moonlight, nor by the light of a torch, but only by the light of a candle, so too, bedikah, the checking of the yetzer hara, must be by the light of the neshama. The neshama is your soul, which is called ner, a candle, as it is written in Proverbs 20:27. The candle of Hashem is the soul of a person, which searches the chambers of any one's inner being. So there is a relationship to God and the soul, such that the soul, as part of God, can guide us into the depths of our being to help us remove any chametz, which here they call the yetzer hara, the evil inclination, from our being, So part of chametz, part of Pesach, is to not just clean chametz from our surroundings, from our environment, from our possessions, but to cleanse ourselves from chametz that exists within us. Again, they call it here the yetzer hara, the evil inclination. With regard to the devash, the honey that is also mentioned in this verse, together, honey, chametz, and seor all represent, in this case, the yetzer hara, the evil inclination. So Rabbeinu Bachya, a different Bachya ibn Pekuda, who is also one of the famous, definitely more famous than the other Bachya that I mentioned before, one of the other famous rabbis of Andalusia, um, says this is why, meaning because these things symbolize the yetzer hara, the evil inclination, this is why both leavened goods and honey have generally been declared as unfit to be the means through which one atones for their sin when bringing a sacrifice. Another reason for this is the well-known statement of our sages that one cannot immerse oneself in a ritual bath and expect it to cleanse one while holding the source of one's ritual impurity, for example, a dead mouse or such like in one's hand. So let me unpack this. So the idea here, when he says he gives this example of going to the mikvah. So the mikvah is a ritual bath, they call it. It's a ritual immersion in water um, that is part of the purification process. When the sages say in the Talmud that you can't go into the mikvah if you're actually holding something impure in your hands, like a dead mouse or a lizard or something like that, you can't actually become cleansed when you go into the mikvah if you're holding on to that. What they're talking about is something internal, right? They're talking about how can you can't actually purify yourself on the outside if your insides still possess the exact same inclination that you had before. You won't fully become cleansed. You actually have to do the work of getting that schmutz, that chametz, and that soor and the davash out of your out of your system so that you can go through the purification process. And this is actually why Ibn Bachya is explaining why the verse in our parasha says that you cannot give an offering to Hashem with these very same items that represent the yetzer hara. The whole point of the sacrifices is to atone for you. So you need to do, just as we do like on Yom Kippur and so forth, we need to work internally as well as externally. As the Talmud says, Toho kivaro, your insides should be like your outsides. So another fascinating argument or a point he makes here is a Kabbalistic approach. He says both chametz and honey are symbols of the attribute of justice. They represent an aspect of judgment and harshness. That's not all bad. In fact, none of these things are all bad. It's just that they have a sitra achra. They have a dark side. So justice is an important thing, but justice can also have a very dark side when it is corrupted. Um, so both chametz and honey are symbols of the attribute of that quality of harshness, of judging other people, of bringing judgment into the world. And they represent an intensive nature rather than something composed of tempering influences. So the idea is not that any of these things are purely bad in themselves. It has to do with equanimity and the qualities we've studied in the Mussar class, the quality of being able to balance yourself between different impulses. So as such, these two phenomena, chametz and honey, have a tendency to estrange you from the altar rather than bring you closer to what the altar represents. Hence, the Torah writes, do not use it to burn it up as a fire offering to Hashem. Another really interesting symbol that, or, a thing that chametz and soor and davash symbolize is laziness. So the Sefer HaChinuch says that regarding distancing of honey, for example, also, oh, I missed one. So sorry, with regard to laziness, he talks about when you're making sourdough, for example, you put the sourdough starter in the flour and water, and it takes quite a while for it to go through the whole rising price process. So he says that part of what you're removing chametz, the reason for why you're removing chametz is because chametz symbolizes something that takes a lot of time to do. So he says, hence in distancing chametz, which is made with great delay, you will take the similarity from your sacrifice to acquire the trait of alacrity, of lightness and speed in doing the act of God. As they say, may their memory be blessed in the Mishnah, be light like the eagle, swift like the deer, and mighty like the lion to do the will of your Creator. We are obligated in the matter with the meal offering of individuals more than with the communal meal offering, since discouragement, fascinating that uses that word, discouragement and laziness are found more with the individual than with the community. So I want to emphasize here, because this is kind of the arc, the arc that I'm choosing is that for this drash is that he highlights here laziness is something that it happens with individuals. Laziness and discouragement is something that happens with individuals. So in the book of Proverbs, the author of the book of Proverbs says to his son, says to him, go contemplate the ways of the ant, you you lazy person. Um, the ant goes about their business on behalf of the whole without really ever giving any thought to themselves as an individual creature, which is an extreme saying. There's a sitra achra to that. There's a dark side to that also. But when we are talking about um, laziness in this case, we're talking about something that separates a person from the community. It's that when we ask ourselves, what is that sloth? What is this quality of laziness? What is it about? It is about an individual separating themselves from the sense of responsibility that they have to the community. With regard to the distancing of honey in the same verse, the Sefer HaChinuch says, "We shall say that the tender children, we shall say to the tender children in order to discipline them, that the cause is to make a similarity that a person should minimize running after foods that are sweet to the palate, which is a custom of gluttons and drunkards that are always drawn after things they desire." He calls it everything sweet, but it's things that they desire. And you should place into your heart to seek foods that are beneficial for your body, rather, necessary for your sustenance, and that protect the health of your limbs. For this reason, it is fit for anyone to not plan their food and drink towards the intention of just pleasure of the throat, of the throat. Um, so again, what we have here is a concern about individual desire that leads you away from the orientation that in a way your body, in a big way, your body belongs to the whole. Your body belongs to the whole community, to the whole of the people of Israel, to God, to the world. And to moderate the drive that we have as individuals to seek our pleasure and to avoid pain for us. Again, this isn't about extremes, okay? So this isn't about extremes. It's about attaining a balance. It's about attaining a balance, okay? And not being too far to the one side or to the other side. The theme that we came up with that we were speaking about earlier with regard to the yetzer hara, the evil inclination, and the way that chametz is associated with the with the yetzer hara. What is the yetzer hara? The yetzer hara again is something that pushes the individual to be separate from the community in pursuing their own desires, in pursuing their own wants. They separate themselves from the community. Okay. And again, I want to emphasize this. We're not talking about extremes here. There's a sitra achra, a very dark side to too much surrendering of the self. And there is a dark side to asserting too much of the self. And the trick, as we have learned in our Mussar class, is the act of balance, is the act of balancing. Menachem Mendel Kasher, he was a 20th century Polish rabbi who lived in what was then Palestine. He also summarizes another aspect in which chametz is connected to these things that separate this drive and this personal interest in separating from the community. So he contrasts it with the concept of avodah zara, which is sort of the prototypical no-no in Judaism, which is foreign worship, bringing in foreign elements to to Judaism. It literally refers to acts of avodah zara, to worshiping other gods. Um, so here's what Kasher says. He says both chametz and avodah zarah share the unique prohibition against possession. They both must be destroyed, and one may not derive benefit from them. In addition, both chametz and avodah zarah cannot be nullified in a ta'arovit. There's no tiny amount that you can have in your possession. And both chametz and avodah zarah, in certain circumstances, may be nullified through an oral declaration. Fine, like as we do on Passover when we nullify any chametz that we may have missed. Finally, just as we check our houses for chametz before Pesach, the Jewish people were commanded to search the land of Israel for remnants of idolatry. So this concept of idolatry is quite nuanced and complicated. And again, it's helpful to think we're not exactly talking about far, total extremes. In fact, many of the biggest heroes of our tradition were people who brought elements from other societies, other peoples into Judaism and made Judaism stronger and more beautiful and more resilient. So the danger is an extreme response to this impulse on either side. Um, but the concept of avodah zarah is essentially moving outside the community, moving outside the boundaries that hold the community, particularly when you're following a sort of foreign god or a foreign idea. So again, the extremes are to be careful about the extremes. All of these things come together, whether we're talking about the evil inclination, the yetzer hara related to chametz, or we're talking about laziness with relation to chametz, or we're talking about avodah zarah with relation to relationship to chametz. All of these are drives. They all stem from the yetzer hara, the evil inclination, to separate yourself from the community. Speaking to that in the Talmud, it says that after Rabbi Alexandri would pray, he would say the following. He would say, Ribono shel olam, Master of the universe, it is revealed and known before you that our will, our deepest desire is to perform your will. What is it that prevents us from doing that? On the one hand, there is the yeast in the dough, the evil inclination that is within every person, and the subjugation to the kingdoms on the other, that is to say, other peoples. May it be your will that you will deliver us from their hands, both the evil inclination and the rule of foreign kingdoms, so that we may return to perform the edicts of your will with a perfect heart. So notice the first person plural that he uses there, we, and he makes this note that it is actually the deepest desire of the soul to live in harmony with the ratzon, the desires of God. The desires of your soul will inevitably be the desires of God, as he says here. Interestingly, the word for to separate is the word pei, is the shoresh pei resh shin. When we make bread to this day, Jews will separate a piece of the dough off of the big loaf of dough, and that piece that you pull off is what is called challah. So we often refer to challah as the loaf of bread that we consume, but in fact, that name comes from the piece that you would pull off, that portion you would pull off in the Bible that is offered to the priests. Today, since there is no temple, we pull off a piece and then we actually burn it or get rid of it in some other way, as a way of saying even when we're baking something with chametz, even when we're participating in something just private and householdy, we are still connecting ourselves to the tradition and connecting ourselves to the community. So Hillel famously said, Al tifrosh min hatzibor, or here they say tifros, al tifros min hatzibor. Um, actually, in this version, they do say tifrosh. So al tifrosh min hatzibor, do not separate yourself from the community. And when we make a blessing over removing the challah, we say Baruch atah Hashem Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahafrish challah, to remove the challah, to separate the challah. Not to mention the fact that in the Haggadah Shel Pesach, there is that there is that fascinating moment that's worth lots and lots of discussion, where it discusses the four children. One of them is a wicked child, and it says Rasha hu mahu omer. The wicked son, what does he say? Ma ha'avodat hazot lachem. What is this service that you're doing here at Pesach to you or for you? Velo lo, and not to him. He doesn't include himself in the first person plural. He doesn't say, why do we do this? He says, why do you do this? And thereby separates himself from the community. And it says, "Ulefi shehotzi et atzmo min haklal kafar beikar." So because he separates himself from the whole of the people of Israel, he denies the very core of our beliefs, because the core of our beliefs have to do with the whole. Va'af ata hakehe et shinav ve'emor lo. And then, so when he says that, it says you should blunt his teeth, which people interpret it as a meaning of punching him in the mouth, like actually slapping him. But I actually hear it as that when the son comes out with that harsh separation, he has fangs, so to speak. And so what you're doing is stop blunting the fangs and saying to him, Ve'emor lo ba'avor zeh asa Adonai li b'tzeiti miMitzrayim. Because of this, Hashem brought me, because of what Hashem did for me in bringing me out of Israel. So the father answers him with the first person, which is really fascinating. Li velo lo, for me and not for him. Ilu haya sham lo haya nig'al. If he was there, if he, this is a third person singular, um, if the son presumably was there, he would not have been redeemed. Why? Because he separated himself from the community. So the Torah doesn't have any of this in it, in a very clear way, but it does hint at this idea that what Pesach is about doing things as a collective, and it's a collective way of thinking, which is so fundamental to Judaism and to our culture. So think of us as part of a big collective of the Jewish community, locally and worldwide. So you hear that emphasis throughout, right? All of this is about the yetzer hara connected to chametz, which is the part of the self that wants what it wants, even when that separates them from the community, um, in assertive and and troublesome ways. There are ways in which you have to assert yourself, as a matter of having the correct amount of humility, because humility is not dissolution of the self. It has to do with the proper balance. It has to do, as we've learned in Mussar class, with taking up the right amount of space. So, want to wish everyone a good Shabbos. Pesach is coming up next. Next Saturday night is when Pesach begins, and our community Seder is next Sunday. So I'm wishing everyone fun and happy and playful preparations for Pesach, and wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom today.